is one of the most researched and studied relics in church history, and profoundly impacts many who encounter its mystery.
As a person of faith, looking at it through the eyes of faith, I don't think it can help but touch your heart.
Something that we can look on not only to bolster our faith in those moments of weakness, but also to deepen our faith and our appreciation, our intimacy with Christ.
Join Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry as they examine the science of the shroud through the lens of faith.
Really interesting scientific information that we didn't know about, like the pollen from all the different regions of the world. As the shroud traveled around, it picked that up. Some of the mites, things like that was really interesting to me. I mean, this made you really want to believe it a lot more.
It's impressive. Like, humanly, I don't think that is another level of love. It's not I'm gonna see people like, oh, I love you, I'll give you a chocolate. No. I'm giving you more than my life. I'm giving you my suffering.
Asking both experts and disciples, who do you say I am?
As far as who the man of the shroud is, I, as a person of faith and kind of reviewing the evidence there, it seems that a convincing argument can be made that it's Jesus of Nazareth.
Visit patchworkheart.org/shroud to learn more and get exclusive behind-the-scenes updates for your support.
The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. This is DeSantis, the Executive Director, joined by our President of the Foundation, Mickey Kelly, for our Beatitudes series. And this has been really a great series. We're headed toward the end. Welcome, Mickey. Thanks for joining me on this podcast.
And it's always great to be here.
It really is, because I think we've really done a lot of discussion on these Beatitudes. I want to encourage our listeners to go back and listen to all of them. And right now we're on number 8, and we do have one more, which is that very last one that some of you may remember is a little longer than the other ones. And this one today is, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And of course, this is part of our Families in Crisis series. And those of you who have been through some type of adversity, whether it's individual, family related, something related to, divorce, separation, marital issues, job loss, health crisis, all those different facets of adversities, you know that sometimes you can go through those moments in your life where you may feel that you are being persecuted for the sake of righteousness. But remember that it says that theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So why don't we start with you, Mickey? What does this one mean to you? Because it might have some special meaning, I think, because you've done so much with the pro-life world and praying for respect for life from conception until natural death. And sometimes you yourself and those around you might have felt like, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting as we unpack this final beatitude, if we want to, second the last, I should rather say. One of the things that really jumps out is, as you mentioned, you brought up a very good example. I mean, let's face it, for half a century, pro-lifers, they endured a cross. And in fact, I recall that the recent Lenten series that was released, and one of the presenters, Pat Stanton, that we know very well, and evidently we just gave him a shout out for this episode here, so I'm sure he would appreciate that, of course. But he mentioned the fact that pro-lifers carry a cross with them every day, and it's in all forms. If you're out in the open, let's say, for example, like you and I have been, that's the Planned Parenthood that was a subject of a bullying campaign from a so-called state representative who lost his bid to become lieutenant governor of our state in the recent primary, Brian Sims, that I'm referring to. The fact is that it's not just him, but there are people that, no matter what age it is, there are people that are taunting, whether it's just one lone pro-lifer, no matter what age he or she is, or a group of people. I've seen taunting in all forms, whether it be having the sign knocked down. You saw it one time yourself, from someone trying to trip you up, to use a recent tragedy as an excuse, like, oh, you don't care about those people, or saying, oh, get a job, or trying to trip you up because you're Catholic and you don't care about the children abused by the predatorial priests who have same-sex attractions, or whatever the case is. But they endure it. And also, too, if you take that out of the context, I mean, they get rejected, they get dissed by family members, co-workers. And let's face it, being a Catholic today is not a walk in the park. I can assure you of that. But you know what? In the end, when our time on earth is over, our reward will be great in heaven.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for all that sharing, and also the connecting, as you did, with the pro-life movement and what you've observed. And, for those people who feel persecuted against certain individuals, that it has happened, and even for people right here where we live in the greater Philadelphia area, is that idea that it's happening close to home, isn't it? And I'm looking at an article having to do with this whole topic of the blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And it's from, as I said, Catholic Culture, and that's the name of the article. A lot of it is based on homily from our Holy Father. And one of the things that he says is that the Beatitude proclaims the same happiness as the first. The kingdom of heaven is given to the persecuted in the same way as the poor in spirit. We thus understand that we have arrived at the end of a single route, which is unfolded through the preceding statements. And so there's promises for every beatitude. And when we look at this one, this one is saying that for theirs is the kingdom of God, or of heaven. And what I'm hearing from this, and from my knowledge, what I do think it means is that the reward is heaven. The reward, because being persecuted is probably one of the hardest things in our lives, isn't it? I don't know about for you, but I do believe that my experience is that when you feel ganged up on by someone in some way, and you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to be righteous and be a follower of Christ and be a disciple. Mick, I don't know if you wanted to talk about your experience with that. I think for all of us, we have times in our lives where we feel it more than others.
Well, I mean, I gave you some examples already a moment ago, but I could expand. I mean, let's face it. There have been times like I would post like Catholic content and I would get attacked, whether it be, like being accused of, and you've seen it yourself, Ann. There are times like I would get attacked because I would post Catholic content and they would go from like rejecting the church teachings or accusing me of idolatry. And it's not just social media, but in real life too. I have seen some of these hardcore Protestants that have a very deep anti-Catholic understanding. And if they're outside of like, whether it's like pro-life events or whatever the case is, they would try to trip you up. The idea is you just keep going, regardless. And sadly, that's the work of the devil. You're trying to there's an opportunity, people of faith come together for the common good. You want to bring an end to an injustice or an unjust law, and there's bickering about religious backgrounds or philosophies, when in reality you have to focus on the task at hand. And I'm not just saying about Catholics and Protestants, but I have seen it with atheists, Islam, even agnostics attacking people because they don't agree that the fact, like, oh, I'm going to be working with this, papists or whatever the slurs are. And if you also look at history too, and the founding of the United States, especially for Catholics, it was ugly. And I'm not just talking about the immigration period, prior to the American Civil War. It goes a little bit, it goes 100 years further, when America had its roots in, at that time it was a colony of Great Britain. And you also look at how soon Catholics will play a role, such as a pair of lieutenants that served under George Washington. But the point is that when there's division, Satan is present. In order to overcome him, you must stand firm, even if it comes at a price.
Yes, divide, deceive, and destroy. I think of those three D's, right, for the devil and Satan and his work.
D cube, I like to call it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think for those of you who are listening and thinking, it's tough. I mean, there's no getting around it. I mean, being persecuted is probably one of the toughest things and the hardest things during these Beatitudes when you read through them and meditate on them, maybe even do something like Lectio Divina on them and meditate on what they mean. But remember, for everyone that might seem a bit negative, meaning like, who wants to be persecuted, right? Who wants to feel that they're being ganged up on, against, hurt, trying to be destroyed by the world? But remember that the promise is heaven. And sticking with Jesus, being his disciple is not an easy thing. And like Mickey said, when you think about the church history and even about the current modern history, right, and what we're going through now every day of our lives, because the closer you become to Christ, some of the times, maybe not all, but you do walk alone some of the times when the closer you become to him. You may become closer to people on a spiritual level because you can almost be another Christ to them. But remember that Christ was mocked. He was killed by the world. But he did it for us. There was a good end to it. So there's always a good end to everything having to do with our faith, remember. We go through Lent, and then there's Easter. And we read the Beatitudes, and then there's also those promises too. And when we read the same article, when I read here from Catholic Culture, as I was reflecting with you earlier on the blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. And this is from the Holy Father. He says that the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who thirst for holiness, those who are merciful, those who are pure in heart, and those who are peacemakers might experience persecution for Christ's sake. But in the end, the persecution is a cause of joy, of great recompense in heaven. The path of the Beatitudes is a paschal journey that leads from a life according to the world to one that is of God, from an existence guided by the flesh, that is, by selfishness, to one guided by the Spirit. And so it's kind of what I just said, isn't it? It's that whole idea that you read it and it might sound almost impossible. How will I get through this life being persecuted, or being poor in spirit, or being meek, or feeling lowly, I guess, in so many ways. But there's also those promises. So I think we need to really keep that in mind. And I thought we could just turn this conversation a little bit back to you, our audience that are listening, who are those families in crisis, wherever you are on that spectrum. And whether it's something that you're going through right now, something that is going to happen, something that happened previously, remember that there's a promise for you too, that when you go through those times, that there is somewhat of a bright light and a happiness and a joy when you have overcome those fears and when you have gotten through those difficult times, and knowing that Christ is with you. I didn't know, Mickey, if in your experience, because you and I both work with people and talk to people about these kinds of things, because we work in this foundation together. You work a lot with pro-life. Have you ever seen, either for yourself or someone else, someone who has been literally persecuted right before your very eyes, that got through that time to better times and then realized that it was the Lord that got them through?
Yes, and actually, I think also too with our foundation it is such a blessing because we are there to help them, if they haven't done so already, of course, to take that first step to begin the healing. Because regardless of where they are after the thing that happens, they still need healing. And there is no doubting that, because there are wounds that are deeper than people carry deeper wounds than others. In my involvement, I have met someone who was attacked for her Catholic beliefs, and this was, in her marriage, and her husband was drinking the whole anti-Catholic Kool-Aid, I like to call it, and he was verbally attacking her and her beliefs, and she, and of course, I understand that she's still in the custody battle and everything. So, but she still maintained the faith, and she's really helping her kids, stay with the faith, no matter what times they will endure. I have seen that, and I do hope and pray that her ex-husband has a change of heart and returns back to his roots. But honestly, I know there are marriages similar to that either it's the husband or the wife being attacked because of their deep Catholic beliefs, and that should not happen at all. But there will be, as Jesus said in the Gospel of John, in the world there will be tribulations, but fear not, I will overcome them. And we will too.
Amen. And we will too. And thank you for the example of the person that you just described. And my prayers go out to her and her family, and even to her ex-husband, to come back to the faith. And to me, that just shows a maturity level too, isn't it? When someone can pray for what some would deem as an enemy of sorts, right? An ex-husband, an ex-wife, or someone that's hurt you in some way in the past, right? But when we can offer those prayers, the care, and willing the best for them, it makes the world of difference. And so thanks for sharing on that one. And for those listening to this, and if you yourself have been divorced or separated, know that that's a very big part of our ministry. And I know I repeat this a lot of times on our podcasts, but our podcasts are to also let you all know what we do. And one of those things that we do is we offer a free pastoral consultation with a Mercedarian friar. They're the ones that founded this beautiful foundation. And you can learn about them at orderofmercy.org. So when you contact us at our website at nonnatus.org, you can make as many appointments as you need with one of our friars to talk about those issues that are either related to some adversity, could be divorce, separation, or some other crisis that you or your family are going through. So just be sure to reach out to us there. But to get back to my topic, I want to go back to this article because I think our Holy Father gives some words of wisdom on this topic. He says that if the world lives on the basis of money, whoever demonstrates that life can be fulfilled through giving and renouncing becomes a nuisance to the system of greed. The world nuisance is the key, because Christian witness alone, which does so much good for many people because they follow it, is a nuisance to those who have worldly mentality. They experience it as a reproach. When sanctity and a life lived as children of God come to the foray in that beauty, which is uncomfortable because it begs that a position be taken, either one allows itself to be open to the question and to the good, or one rejects the light and hardens one's heart, even to the point of oppression and hounding. It is curious, it calls our attention to see in the persecution of martyrs, hostility grows to a point of hounding. It is enough to see the persecutions of the last century of the European dictatorships, how one arrives at this hounding of Christians against Christian witness and against the heroism of Christians. I think that's really interesting to look at, because what it's saying is, if put it in a couple sentences, is that goodness that shines through when a person is living a good life, following Christ as a disciple, striving to avoid sin, staying close to God, is that the enemies of the world, and we could say Satan, or those who are not with the Lord in some way, and maybe living a life apart from God, that it calls them, he used the words, hounding them, hounding people. And that's where the persecution of martyrs, he says, and hostility grows to the point of hounding. And I know you and I, Mickey, in the pro-life movement, as we've done things in the past together and witnessed that whole thing, it is somewhat of a hounding when you even look at that aspect of how people sometimes it's a disrespect that's given. But I guess what I'm saying to all of you, no matter what that distress that you're going through, even if it's nothing related to what I'm talking about here, it's something else, but you're trying your best to strive and you're feeling that opposition, you're doing God's work. And I just want to say to us, to you, from Mickey and I, and from our foundation, that we're here for you and that you will get through this situation.
Absolutely, Anne. And then let's face it, many of the saints in the church, they endured persecutions themselves. Look at some of the martyrs. And there are two types of martyrdom. You have the red martyrdom, like you shed blood for the faith because you refuse. Look at St. Thomas More. He refused to acknowledge the marriage of Henry VIII with whoever it was, Catherine of Aragon, whoever it was. He refused to sign off on that because he stood true to the church teachings of marriage, and he paid the price. And he was falsely accused for treason. But in the end, St. Thomas More knew that he was God's servant first and the king's last, in his words. Another example would be, you look at Jesus first, the apostles. 11 out of 12 of them were killed for the faith. They laid down their life for the gospel. As Christ said at the Last Supper in the Gospel of John, no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. And that's what Jesus did. He foretold that, and in time, many men and women will follow him. Look at some of the religious lay people, priests, bishops. They were criticized. Even look at Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone, and I hope he's listening to this, by the way, the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, who recently enforced Canon 915 against a Catholic in name only politician. We all know who she is, but we just, as part of the foundation, we ask you please pray for her conversion. But at the same time, pray for our shepherds who are in a very challenging situation on deciding whether to please God or please their flock. But we have to understand that we have a mission in life, and that is to stand out, not stand in with the crowd, stand out of the crowd while we be judged by God instead of judged by people. And we need to really step it up, because there is a time for heroes and there's a time for cowards. And for the Catholic Church, the time for heroes is now.
Yeah, the time for heroes is now. There's so much happening in the world right now, especially that affects us, right? Affects us with our faith. And thanks for those reflections for all of us to really take seriously everything that you just said. And it does have to do with this topic. It does have to do with blessed are those who are persecuted. And just to go back to what I was saying with the Holy Father, he says that this shows the drama of persecution. It's also a place of liberation from subjection to the world's success, vainglory, and compromises. What do those who are rejected by the world for Christ's sake rejoice in? They rejoice that they have found something worth more than the whole world. In fact, what advantage is there that a person should gain the whole world and lose his life or her own life? What advantage is there? I mean, that's a question for all of us. I mean, of course, that's right from Scripture, and it's right from Mark 8:36, that, you know, when we lose our life for something that's not even worth it. It's one thing, a martyr who's doing it and they're being martyred, but it's for their faith. It's for the sake of the kingdom. When we follow Christ, there's going to be crosses, right? There's going to be pain, but we know that in the end, God will see us through, if not here on earth, but definitely in heaven. And I think this is a topic that I would say to all of you is that keep learning about this topic. Keep learning about the Beatitudes and learn about the saints. I know, Mickey, you've talked so much about different saints that have been martyred and those who have, you know, given their lives for us, for our faith, so that we could celebrate our faith today. I would also say to all of you that if you've never heard of or know much about this religious order that we represent, the Mercedarian Order, the Fathers of Our Lady of Mercy, please do check out their website and go to orderofmercy.org, because there's a host of saints there. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I mean, this one that that we represent, Saint Raymond Nonnatus, he is the patron saint of Christian families. He's the patron saint of expectant mothers and of childbirth. And he's also the patron saint of those who are falsely accused. And I think when I think of being falsely accused, I think of this topic. I think of being persecuted for the sake of righteousness. I think of maybe someone like Mickey described. It could be a divorced or separated person who, through no fault of their own, perhaps, was trying their very best in their marriage. And for whatever reason, it just did not work out to their liking. But your story isn't over. And that's why we're here with you to get you through, because we help not only people like you, but all kinds of families in crisis. Mickey, did you have any other words? We're coming fairly close, maybe another 10 minutes or so to the end of the podcast. Anything to say on blessed are the persecuted?
Pope Francis actually had a very good quote that if we annoy people with the gospel, thanks be to God. And let's face it, we Catholics must start annoying people. Now, I'm not just saying like banging people in the head with a Bible or anything like that. No. That's I'll leave that to the bleeding heart Protestants who are, very judgmental and all that, y'all. But anyway, the one thing that would really stand out is that we need to be faithful witnesses. And in order for us to be faithful witnesses, we need to keep telling our story. And we need to keep telling the story of God's love, just as the first followers did. And the first group of martyrs, especially under a very tyrannical regime from the Roman Empire, like Nero and all those other Caesars that came after Caesar Augustus and everything. But sainthood is not for religious, clergy, religious life, bishops. Even St. John Paul the Great knew that sainthood can be strived, can be practiced, can be achieved by regular Catholics like you and me. So, get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Get started. And that is the truth, what you just said. John Paul the Great did say that, John Paul II, Pope John Paul. And we can live out our lives in our vocations just as we are. I mean, whether you're married, single, religious, priest, whoever you are, God is calling you. And what is a saint? It's someone who loves God more than anything else, and above all, does his will and cheerfully, right, every single day, and doesn't give up either. And that's part of it. That's part of being a saint, is don't give up. Because when you read these Beatitudes, you might read them and say, I want to give up. I have been persecuted. I feel a lot of those woes, I guess, that when you read in the Beatitudes, not the woes, but I mean the beginning part of each Beatitude. But you have to, as I keep hammering this in, is that remembering that there's the blessed part of it too. And the Holy Father says in this article, again, that same one, he says, we must be faithful to the humble path of the Beatitudes because it leads to being of Christ and not of the world. It is worth remembering St. Paul's journey, that he thought he was a righteous person. He actually was a persecutor. But when he discovered that he was a persecutor, he became a man of love who happily faced suffering of the persecution he suffered. And that's, if you read in Colossians 1:24, that's what it's referring to. I think St. Paul is an excellent saint for us to look at in those terms, because he was on the other side, wasn't he? He was on the other side of being the persecutor and not the persecuted. But God, obviously things changed around and he was martyred for his faith. But look at the results to that. Look what happened all these centuries later, is that people can read his words, both Catholics and Christians alike, all over the world for, as I said, for so many centuries. And it's still having an impact today. It's having an impact on us, both Mickey and I and our foundation, and also all of you who are listening here. So we just want to thank you for being a part of, this podcast. And you're going to have to definitely stay tuned with us for our last one, because I think that these Beatitudes were wonderful for us to reflect on every single week. Every single month. The last one that we're going to be doing is blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. That's a lot to unpack. I don't know if before we end, Mickey, you wanted to say anything final about that before we end.
Well, Anne, I honestly thought that the eighth Beatitude and the one you just mentioned, I thought they're like, I kind of think of them as like Siamese twins. So they kind of like piggyback from each other. And let's face it, our faith journey, part of it is we're going to have, I kind of think of the people that want to, I think of when you watch a movie, you have a protagonist. When you watch a movie, you read a book, whatever the case is, you have a protagonist and you have an antagonist. And the antagonist can be a person, a group of people, whatever the case is. But the antagonist has one goal in mind. That is to keep the protagonist from achieving their goals. And when you sit through a movie theater for like 90, like an hour and a half to up to 3 hours, what you hope to see when it's all over is your main character coming out on top and not having them get the best of you. And Hollywood has had a fair share of some excellent movies, whether it's sports, comic comic-based movies, movies based on novels, or movies based on actual events. And there have been times the protagonist came maybe an inch away from giving up completely. All it took was maybe like a kick in the butt, and they got back in, and they eventually, achieved their goal. And there are going to be times we're going to have people, the antagonists in this case would be people that don't have an understanding of Catholic faith, those that were brought up Catholic yet fell away because of the lack of catechism, the lack of understanding, or if they think they are God. What we must do is remain true to what is good, beautiful, and authentic. Christ's teachings will never be altered. It would never be changed. And most certainly, it will conquer the world. All it needs is faithful men and women to step forward, to be bold, and to be real Catholics.
Amen. Very well said. Thank you so much for your contribution for this podcast, Mickey. We all really appreciate it. It takes two to do this. And when we have two people coming together like us, who both of us are trying our best to relay this information, it's just great to have that kind of going the back and forth with different ideas and thoughts on this. And we hope that we've helped you too. Please do stay in touch with us and listen to those other podcasts. Like I said, the whole Beatitudes series, we have one more. Our YouTube channel is Philly Nonnatus, as a lot of you know. Please do subscribe to that channel. Go to our website and our mailing list. And the only other favor I would ask is to all of you to share these podcasts. When you listen to them and you got something from it, send it to a friend of yours. Send it to your diocese, your archdiocese, or your church. Perhaps this might be good discussion for some church groups too, to listen to these podcasts and also to be able to reflect on some of the thoughts and ideas. So Mickey, again, thank you. And we will see all of you here next month with the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. God bless.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Did you enjoy this podcast? Listen to other podcasts from Patchwork Heart Ministry by following Patchwork Heart Radio wherever you listen to podcasts.